This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, before we get started with today's Critical Thought, just a brief announcement. This Thursday for our weekly Game Wisdom Live, I'm going to be talking a little bit more, or the first act will be about the Patreon campaign. I've been thinking about it, and I think I have some ideas of sprucing things up, and essentially doing almost a soft reboot of it. So if you want to learn more about that and have any suggestions to give, be sure to tune into this week's Game Wisdom Live, probably around 8 EST on the Twitch channel, GW Bycer. And if you miss it, it will be recorded or up here on YouTube the next day. But let's get into today's Critical Thought. And this is the opposite of yesterday's Critical Thought, talking about small games. For this one, I want to focus on games built on multiple systems, so an almost jack-of-all-trades kind of approach to game development. With yesterday's Critical Thought on small games, we focused on titles built on a very short experience or one very refined gameplay loop. Something like Pony Island, the numerous social or free-to-play games, and of course all those $5 and less games you find on Steam. But for today, we're going to focus on games where the developers basically go big. When we're talking about games built on multiple systems, a term that I like to use was multi-system design, where we see games that take or pick and choose from different genres to create something unique. An older example, of course, be XCOM. Recent examples could be stuff like Borderlands, Shadow Warrior 2, and other games that combine RPG and action gameplay. And in smaller cases, we see games that have multiple mini games or multiple ways of playing the game, such as RPGs that may have a city building element, action games that may have a dancing mini game, and a lot more. For these kinds of games, it leads into a very interesting discussion about when these games become greater than the sum of their parts. And when this works and you build multiple systems that all come together well, you're essentially almost creating your own genre or your own kind of game design. And two really big examples of this working would be, well, one of our most famous, Metroidvania, which is literally the meshing of Castlevania and Metroid. But as the developer said in one of his interviews, he actually borrowed elements from The Legend of Zelda. Another big example of this kind of combining these different games together would be something like Metal Gear Solid, and how essentially the coin of the game would be tactical espionage action, but it's really a combination of various action and stealth-like design, and this was elevated through the 5 main series and several of the side stories. And what we see when this kind of multiple system or multiple genre approach works is that the game essentially becomes its own genre and its own unique take. But whenever we see games that combine multiple genres or multiple systems into something unique, it does run with some inherent risks and can hurt the game if not properly taken care of. In an earlier Critical Thought, I talked about the difference between action and abstraction gameplay. Action, of course, are games built on player skill, action games like Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden, first-person shooters like Doom, Call of Duty, etc. Abstraction, of course, games built on the player, the in-game player themselves, growing in terms of leveling up, new gear, equipment, etc. Again, pick an RPG, and it's probably an example. And one of the risks you have when you have these two essentially polarized elements is when you try to combine elements of the two, it tends to push away the hardcore fans of the genre. When you have an action game with RPG elements to it, hardcore action fans don't like the fact that their skill is being downplayed. Likewise, RPG fans who are used to games like Baldur's Gate, Final Fantasy, etc., aren't particularly fond of games where hand-eye coordination and rapid pressing and timing are required to succeed. And when we talk about games built on multiple systems, one of the bigger risks involved is you're essentially going to be combining genres which aren't normally known to go together into one thing. And what can end up happening is you may create a game that some of the fans will like it, but others may not like essentially the other genres interfering. Another case is the fact that whenever you have this kind of jack-of-all-trades approach, what ends up normally happening is the developer will either try to create a one-size-fits-all UI or design, or they're going to essentially go with like a shotgun approach, trying to hit as many different genres or game mechanics as you can without focusing on one predominantly. And keep that in the back of your mind, because I'll be coming back to that in the next minute. But for the first part, when you're going with a one-size-fits-all, there is two really good examples of this, and this could probably be one of the weirdest comparisons yet on the channel. But the comparison I want to talk about is Grand Theft Auto and Stardew Valley. That's definitely a good one. But both series, or I'm sorry, Grand Theft Auto as a series and Stardew Valley as a game, both rely on one UI or one control scheme that is then fit to multiple systems. With Grand Theft Auto, it's going to be hand-to-hand combat, third and first person shooting, driving cars, flying airplanes and helicopters, and of course the open world style gameplay. In Stardew Valley, it's going to be dealing with villagers, the farming mechanics themselves, fishing, combat, and I guess that's technically it, and of course the progression of building your farm out. In both games, the UI, again, is basically designed to work with all the systems. And what ends up happening is that in these kinds of games, we tend to have like a almost floaty or not as tight control scheme as we would like. And again, when we use terms like floatiness and tight or responsive, it can be very difficult to quantify that. But what you see in games, especially the open world titles such as Just Cause, Mad Max, Shadows of Mordor, etc., is that it's very easy for the wrong command to go off. Like, I'm trying to climb up stealthily, and I'll hit the wrong context-sensitive button, and I may just jump off the tower and try to do a stealth kill. And this is generally the case when you're combining all these different mechanics and systems together, but trying to fit under one unified control scheme. With Stardew Valley as the other example, one of the issues that I ran into is how cumbersome it is to fight or to go into the game's dungeons. The issue is that you're using the same general control scheme that you're going to be, farming, watering your crops, and talking to people with, that you are going, slicing up monsters in the cavern. And the problem is that because you have to make sure your gear is set to the right inventory slots, it would have been easier just to simply have like a UI that just says, when I'm in the dungeon, left clicking will swing a weapon. That's it. But the problem with Stardew Valley is that you have to keep managing your inventory, you have to make sure everything is in the right place, and one of the issues is that the game won't prioritize combat and healing items when you're in the dungeon. It will basically just use one priority when you sort. So you have to stop and manually place your healing items on the top hotkey bar, your weapons, etc. Now, going back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, and for our final point for today, the other kind of issue when we see games that combine genres or systems is the scattershot approach, or the jack-of-all-trades. And my big example for today of that is Yakuza Zero, which has a really good screenshot. Look how intent he is on racing pocket cars. For those of you who missed the spotlight or missed the news, I was able to get a press copy of Yakuza Zero, and Yakuza Zero, I'm sorry, and I've been playing it on and off. I'll have my review up, I believe, this week. Unfortunately, I'm still under NDA for right now, but One of the things about the Yakuza series and its spiritual prequel, I guess Shenmue, is that these games go for a very wide berth in terms of mechanics. With Yakuza, it's not just about hand-to-hand combat. You have RPG progression, you have arcade minigames, dancing minigames, dating minigames, the pocket racing minigame in Yakuza Zero. There's even side games about running two businesses in Yakuza Zero, and there's probably even more than I'm mentioning here. And when I talked about the game in my spotlight video, I mentioned the fact that it's very much built as an RPG first rather than an action game. And that's different from other games such as Watch Dogs, Grand Theft Auto, and other open world games. And what I run into with Yakuza Zero is that there's no one system in that game that I'm loving. Again, they go with just throwing everything at the player, and while this provides variety, it prevents anything from being standout or amazing. And that brings me to the big question I want to ask you folks for today. When you play, of course, all kinds of games, do you prefer a game that is built on one very refined or polished core gameplay loop? Or do you like games that go with, again, this scattershot or shotgun approach? We're going to hit you with 5 or 6 different gameplay systems. RPGs will probably be a good example of this, especially those like Final Fantasy that throw in different mini quests or side quests, stuff like that. And what we run into is a very classic game design philosophy problem, or question. Do you like a game that does one thing really, really well, or do you like a game that does 4 or 5 things, but just average or okay? Let me know what you think in the comments below. But to wrap up today's critical thought, games that are built on multiple systems or multiple kinds of genres, again, focus on the greater than the sum of their parts kind of philosophy. And when it works, it can lead to some very amazing games. Everything from renowned explorers, The World Ends With You, XCOM, Star Control, Grand Theft Auto, Metal Gear, and I could spend another 5 minutes going through my list of names. But whenever you try to combine genres and systems that are almost like dynamically or diametrically, I'm completely slurring my speech there, opposed, you run the risk of alienating those fans. Again, hardcore action fans aren't going to like hardcore RPGs and vice versa. And there have been games that I've played that just did not manage to hook me because of that. I've mentioned, of course, examples like the Witcher series, the Elder Scrolls series, especially recent ones, and of course Fallout 3 and 4. And when you're combining, again, these different kinds of systems, you have to be really careful with where the main focus is, because no matter how evenly you try to combine them, one will always be predominant. In Borderlands, for instance, it's going to be the first-person shooting first, and then the RPG elements second. While in Fallout 3 and 4, it's the RPG elements first, then the first-person shooting elements second. And this is always the challenge when you're combining these systems. And we're not even talking about the effective pacing and implementation, because that's entirely different topics in and of themselves. But to wrap up today's critical thought, for those of you watching this, what are some other really good examples of games that had, again, these multiple genres or designs all squished together? And what are some examples of games you played where it didn't work? And I'll give you one more other one that I almost forgot to mention. The ever famous example of action games that strip the player of all their weapons and then put them into a stealth sequence without any other stealth mechanics or design in the title. And we can think of a lot of older action games, especially those from the late 90s, early 2000s, that ran with that trick. My always favorite example that drove me nuts was Siphon Filter, the original one for the PlayStation 1. But I'm sure there are plenty more out there. But for now, we're going to end things here. As always, thank you so much for watching and enjoying these videos. For you first-timers, be sure to like and subscribe. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Be sure to check back daily for more great content here and on Game Wisdom. But until then, have a great rest of the evening. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.